ass cry. Richard is nominated for an Emmy, and hopefully will win on September 20th, for a TV show called American Crime, if any of you have seen it. And competition is Bill Murray and people like that, so we're hopeful. But Richard, you are the accomplishment.
Yeah.
Thank you, Luis Gerardo, for your spirit and your presence here. Thank you, Fabian, and the cast of morning meeting. As some of you know, that's how we begin every day, so we wanted to give you a flavor of that. Thank you, Steve, for your heart and good words. Thank you, Marissa, for already a magnificent gathering. And thank you for being here. I invite you to be here. At Homeboy Industries, we practice dwelling in the present moment. This is a thing we seek to do every day, believing that we are saved only in the present moment. The Buddha teaches that life is only available to us in the here and now, and Jesus wouldn't disagree with him. It's been the privilege of my life for 30 years to work with gang members, and so they taught me so much. And remember in the early days, I would call a homie or return a phone call, and I'd say, "What are you doing?" And they'd always say, "Just right here," which was the prelude to what they were going to tell me that they were actually doing at the present moment. I think it comes from the Spanish "aquí nomás," where we don't really say that in English, but they would translate it. They would say, "Just right here." I used to collect them. "Just right here, washing my face. I still have soap on it." "Just right here, watching Jerry Springer." "Just right here, drawing Winnie the Pooh for my daughter." "Just right here, staring at my son." So I thank you for being here, but I also invite you to be here. For paradise is contained in the present moment, and I think that's worth noting. It's not about a place that awaits our arrival. It really is a present moment that we all choose to arrive at. It's not around the corner, it's in fact the corner, just right here. Years ago there was a homie who was in our training program named Ricardo, 18 years old, and he had been locked up in a probation camp, and I had said mass there regularly, and so he came and worked at our place and was in our school and even had a young son, and was trying to navigate the treacherous waters of his life and leave behind gang life and embrace something with the fullness to it. But he remembered this homily I gave at the probation camp, and that's not really typical. Homies will vaguely remember a homily with not very much precision, Hey, I remember you preached at Central Juvenile Hall, yeah, and you told that story, the one about the gang member with tattoos, which is basically every story I've ever told. And that's all he can recall. But Ricardo always remembered, he remembered this homily I gave about Jesus hanging between the two ladrones. And that Jesus, sort of in a shorthand here, turns to a thief and says simply, "This day with me, paradise." And of course the most important words there are this day, that it's paradise. It's in the here and now, it's not about the hereafter. And he always remembered that, and so periodically he'd come into my office and tell me how this day he had experienced a sense of paradise. So I remember he came into my office once and he sat down in front of my desk and he said, "Yesterday I was taken by God on a ride to paradise." I said, "Wow, I am all years. You had me at cooking. And he said, I was in my car with my lady in my tore up Rafla, and we were driving to her school. She had to turn in an assignment. And we argued the whole time there. The whole damn time we argued. Petty stuff, little shit. All we did was argue. And then she gets out of the car, turns in the assignment, and then she gets in the car, and we argued all the way home. And we were almost home, and all of a sudden there's this noise under the hood, and smoke is coming out of the car. And we have to get off, so I pull off the freeway and I find a gas station. And as soon as I pull into the gas station, the car dies. I called the grua. It took 3 hours for the tow truck to get there. Then he looks at me and he smiles and he says, "Paradise." I said, "I'm not sure I'm following you on this one." And he said, "Well, my lady and me, we talked for 3 hours. We just talked. We decided not to fight. We told each other how grateful we are that we're in each other's life. Damn. Where would we be if we didn't have each other?" Then he pauses and smiles. And he says, "Yeah, paradise." We dwell in the present moment because with any luck, we're going to be cooking on a ride to paradise. That's the hope, anyway. Martin Luther King, in his Nobel Peace Prize acceptance speech, said, "I believe that the unaltered truth and unconditional love will have the last word." And all of us in this room believe the very same thing. The Global Homeboy Network doesn't want to just join the dialogue, it wants to create it. We are not just called to do things, but rather ask ourselves what will become of us if we stand with folks on the margins. So though we are coming from disparate places and countries and counties and cities, though maybe we work with a varied kind of population, and though we might choose to do different things like, social enterprises or mentoring or anger management, there are principles that I think we embrace. One of them is that we believe in the creation of a community of kinship such that God, in fact, might recognize it. We think that kinship is God's dream come true for us. No kinship, no peace. No kinship, no justice. Often enough today, people will insist, no justice, no peace. But the truth is, no kinship, no justice or peace. No matter how singularly focused we may well be on those worthy goals, the truth of the matter is, they actually can't happen unless there's an undergirding sense that we belong to each other. Or as Richard so eloquently said, "I am you and you are me." How do we obliterate once and for all the illusion that we are separate, that there is an us and a them? You can reduce everything to what might well be wrong in our cities and in our countries to that idea, that gulf, that division, to the idea that there just might be lives out there that matter less than other lives. The Global Homeboy Network stands against that idea. It announces the belief that we belong to each other. It wants to dismantle the barriers that exclude. It seeks to stand at the edges, at the margins, because all of us have had a palpable experience of looking under our feet and being surprised and delighted and amazed that the margins are getting erased because, in fact, we chose to stand there. And the Global Homeboy Network chooses kind of not to work with the most likely to succeed so that we enhance our evidence-based outcomes. But that, in fact, we want to stand with the folks with whom nobody ever wants to stand. With the rechazados and the marginados and the aislados and the people who are easily despised and left out. Those are the folks with whom we wish to stand. And when we stand there, we are filled with a deep and pervasive sense of awe at what they've had to carry, rather than judgment at how they've carried it. We stand as the Global Homeboy Network believing that community in the end will trump gangs, but it'll trump everything else. Community of kinship is God's dream come true. We announce that. If there's anything we denounce, is we mainly want to be attentive to the fact that the outsider view is often enough driving the inside of what we do. It drives the inside of our policy. It drives the inside of our programs and our projects. We kind of want to be attentive to that because we don't want that to happen. Most programs in the world, especially in the United States, that wants to deal with the population that most of us work with, wants to view it from the outside and kind of say, here is what your problem is. And so they identify what the problem is, and then they seek to set up a goal. And it's usually, the model is the ascent model. It's the ladder. You're way down here, and we want to get you here. So in 2 years, you'll be employable, because right now, you're unemployable. In 2 years, you will have built your character because now it's bankrupt. In 2 years, you will be trained and certified and educated because now you don't know very much. In 2 years, you will embrace my traditional family values. Nobody in this room has ever met a hopeful kid who joined a gang. That's never happened. Equally, nobody in this room has ever met a bad diagnosis that led to a healthy treatment plan. That's never happened in the history of the world. So it's important to not allow the outsider view to drive the inside of what we do. I don't save anybody. I do not transform any lives. I do not rescue anybody. I do not heal anybody. But I believe that in a community of kinship, we are all healed, we are all saved, we are all rescued. Damaged people damage people, and transformed people transform people. But it is not a thing I do to you. It is a thing that happens in a community. And it is the only way that it happens. And we do it together, as the Global Homeboy Network, I think, asserts and proclaims, as wounded, broken people. If I do not welcome my wound, then I will have a tendency to despise the wounded. And this is what we need to avoid. The goal is not to become perfect. The goal is to become whole. But that isn't just the goal of those who are clients. That is the goal of every single person in this room. We're all a cry for help. We're all in need of healing. Which is a nice thing. Because like Steve's example of the broken glass, my brokenness meets yours. And we're all healed. I am you, and you are me. So we believe in the primacy of healing, because in the end we know that that is the only thing that ultimately works. No one will reoffend if they're healed, period. Employability helps, that's what we engage in at Homeboy. Training, education, certification, anger management, therapy, I suppose character building, I suppose re-tinkering of values, but in the end, none of those things will guarantee that someone will not re-offend and fall down this spiral of destruction. The only thing that does that is healing. So it matters here at the Global Homeboy Network, it matters what we choose to address. Because the world wants to address all sorts of things that are ill-conceived. because it's a bad diagnosis. There's something wrong with you, and unless you fix yourself, this will never work. We want to embrace something that is completely different. And so folks don't need just love, they really need tenderness. Because only through tenderness can we arrive at some mutual transformation. Otherwise, love stays in the air, or it stays in my head, or it stays in my heart, but only if it becomes tenderness does it become the connective tissue that joins me to you and you to me. It can only happen in tenderness. It is the only thing that is ultimately and finally transformational. The poet writes, "No obstacles in my heart, everything a frail boned kindness." That's where we want to anchor ourselves in these 2 days. Somebody sent me a YouTube clip once of a homie, an African-American gang member who was giving a tour, Devon. And he was giving the tour to these 4 ladies, and the lady filmed it for some reason. And they're standing in front of our Employment Services Division, and he's sort of pointing at the job developers who locate employment after folks have completed their 18-month training program. And he begins the sentence by saying, "And as Father Greg always says," and whenever a homie begins a sentence that way, you can be assured he's about to say something I've never said. And he did not disappoint. He says, "As Father Greg always says, it's not about work for the homie, it's about the homie working on himself." And I've been quoting him ever since. I remember we got invited to meet Barack Obama, and we were in this airless room after a speech he gave at LA Trade Tech, and so we had about 4 homies who were really quite excited to be there. And Dan, we said, you know, even rappers don't get to meet the president. And they were completely thrilled, you know, and they said, "Watch, he's going to say, 'Call me Barack.'" That actually didn't happen. But there they were in their Homeboy shirts, and you just looked at them and you were in awe at what they've had to navigate in their lives. You were in awe at what they've had to carry. You were in awe at the choices that they were forced to make, knowing that all choices aren't created equal. I was born in the world, but I never had to face choices that these 4 young men had to face. And so Barack Obama shook the hand of Herbie, and he said, what do you do at Homeboy Industries? And he said, "Well, I'm the janitorial maintenance crew, but I mainly work on myself, anger management, therapy, parenting, healing." And the leader of the free world shook his hand and said, "I commend you." And that's correct. There was a program that was in the LA Times last week, somewhere in San Luis Obispo, kind of a boot camp of some kind. And the pillars of what they do there, it says in the article, leadership, discipline, empowerment. And now they're under criminal investigation for beating down kids and torturing them, really. And the principle, I suppose, is scared straight, writ large. But the Global Homeboy Network believes in cared straight, that the only power we have at our disposal is kindness and tenderness. The job is nice, but healing is forever. And so together, as a network, we choose to create a field of kindness and care and attention, a fecundity of healing. where people are returned to themselves. They don't become something that they're not. They discover the truth of who they are. Just like paradise is not around the corner, paradise is the corner. And the folks we're privileged to accompany discover that they are exactly what God had in mind when God made them. And so they become that truth. They inhabit that truth. And no bullet can pierce it. No four prison walls can keep that out. And death can't touch it because it's so huge. But as people find transformation, as people find the discovery of the truth of who they are, as people find themselves being returned to themselves, all of us in this room find ourselves on the receiving end of the very same thing. And so I have a homie in my office named Louis, who is in his early 20s. And I knew him since he was like 15 years old. And he was a knucklehead, and he was engaged in stuff that I used to sort of tell myself, hey, I'm not sure he'll ever be able to turn this ship around. And so he was in prison. He gets out of prison, and then he spends 6 months by his mother's bedside as she dies of cancer. And in recovery, they say it takes what it takes, and I suspect this is what it took. And then he shows up in my office. Though I had known him on the streets for a long time, I had never seen him in my office until that moment. And so he began in our 18-month training program. Well, 8 months in, he comes into my office, and he tells me what had happened to him the day before. That he was on the train going home around 5 o'clock. It was a packed train. He was able to get a seat, and standing in front of him, hanging onto a pole, was a medio bellow, a little bit drunk guy. He had tattoos. He was older than Louis, and it seemed to him like he was maybe had been a homie. And Louis was wearing a shirt that said Homeboy Industries, jobs not jails, big old t-shirt. And the drunk guy points at his shirt. He says, "You work at Homeboy Industries?" And Louis says, "Yeah, I do." "Is it any good?" And Louis shrugs and he says, "Yeah, it's helped me. In fact, I don't think I'll ever go back to prison because of that place." And then Louis tells me that he stands and he reaches into his pocket and he finds a piece of paper and he pulls out a pen and he writes the address of Homeboy Industries on this piece of paper, and he says to me, I couldn't believe I had it memorized. And he hands it to the medio drunk guy, who stares at it, and then he looks at Louis and he says, "Thank you." And the train stops, and the drunk guy gets off the train, and the door closes. And then Louis says to me, "And what happens next has never happened in my life." He says that everybody on the train was looking at him and nodding and smiling. And for the first time in my life, he says, and then he catches himself because he's filled with emotion. For the first time in my life, I felt admired. Well, that's the sound of a human being being returned to himself. That's what it looks like to be taken on a ride by God to paradise. No obstacles in his heart. Only frail-boned kindness. And we all believe that unaltered truth and unconditional love will have the last word, because that's what it looks like. Paradise. Just right here. Have a good day.